I want to know what the thing was with HRT. Everyone's talking about HRT, these fake natties, these guys who come off steroids and say, I'm only on HRT dose. Apparently it's a thing that is very convoluted, and it's just an idea that people have in their head to rationalize the fact that they're on gear. So there's a video here by BioS3 Training. I forget his name. I've been following him for a while. He talks about it, he gives it straight. So I'm gonna react to it. Maybe Greg Doucette is gonna hear this and give a little more of an explanation as to what his TRT doses are. He says it's prescribed by a doctor. What is it exactly? What kind of doctor? Is it real TRT or is it a doctor making a buck? And I know Greg has talked about he would be like 20 pounds lighter, but he would be just as ripped. Is it true? We don't know because he's on TRT. And he keeps saying that TRT does my mail for me. It runs my errands for me. It does all my videos for me. When you make light of something, there's something deeper behind that. Inquiring minds want to know. So let me react to this video and let's see if Greg will take the challenge and get off gear. Get off TRT for 3 years. I saw the video a bit, so I'm ahead of myself. Let's see.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to BioS3 Raw TV. Boy, we have a pretty cool one tonight. So this video is really for two different types of people. The people that are on gear and people that are off gear. That's pretty much everybody. But anyways, it's got two different points of view, and I want to talk to you guys tonight specifically from experience. And this is not just my experience. This is experience for myself and many people throughout the years that I guess you could say this is like my own personal little meta study. Because I ask these questions and I do try to get a lot of information about the topic we're going to talk about tonight. And that is, like, what does gear really do for you? And I think that most people would laugh at that. But I'm going to try to give you guys a little bit of insight because when you are...
Isn't a meta study a collection of many studies? So he's actually doing one study, informal, random. So he's not doing a meta study, he's doing one study, and it's pretty observational. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Or not on gear, you have one way of looking at it. Whether you ever thought about it, didn't think about it, are thinking about it, you have one way of looking at it. When you're on gear, you have a different way of looking at it. And remember, you're the same person, so off gear and on gear, you have a different way of looking at it. Your opinion should change based on what you see, but I think a lot of people get so wrapped up in the actual, the actual taking the gear and what it does and how you change and grow, that I think they don't really pay attention to how it works. Now, let me kind of go over it. So we'll start with the people that are not on gear, the natural guys, the natty guys or girls, whatever. So there's some people out there that are natural, and I thought the same thing back in the day. I thought taking gear, steroids was cheating. Like, it's cheating, I don't need it. As a matter of fact, I was just telling the story the other day. I was so naive when I was younger that me and my training partner Donnie, we were just huge bodybuilding fans, and we were teenagers and we had never taken anything, and we hadn't planned on taking anything. And Dorian was my guy, Kevin Lavroni was his guy, and we used to say, like, man, I think I can get to that level. I can look like Dorian and he can look like Kevin if we just kept training hard enough, stayed natural, stuck to our diets and rested and kept using progressive resistance and overload. Eventually we would be able to get there and not have to cheat like they did. Now listen to me. I know right now you're like, Jerry, what the fuck? I completely understand what you're thinking. I was 16 at the time, didn't understand how powerful steroids were, didn't even really understand training and diet and what that consists of and what limitations can come just from those two things, just from your genetics alone. Like, if you don't have the genetics like Dorian, then there's no way you're going to look like him when you do take steroids. Well, we didn't know that, right? So what happened, Jerry? Why didn't you stay natural? Well, reality happened, right? So as we get further along, I'm 19 years old now, not now, then, and I'm 205 pounds, and...
Is it reality, though, or is it delusion? You know what I mean? I'll get more into that.
I'm completely natural. I have no plans on going on stuff. And then I start to notice, like, now the gains are not really coming. If I try to push it, I get a little bit fatter. Not really growing new muscle. 205 at 19 at 5'9" was pretty big. So I was a pretty solid 205. And I was already benching, I was literally benching the dumbbells that were 125s for reps. Natural, without anything at all. And my diet was pretty fucked up. I'll be honest with you. I eat a lot of shit. I didn't really understand. I kind of understood macros. But back then, macros weren't a big thing. It was about calories and then percents. It's like 60% carbs, 30% protein, 10% fat. It was like all percents, and you had to sit down and figure out how many calories you needed, then break it down into which percents are what, and then break that down into grams, and that's how many grams of protein, fats, and carbs you had. But it was really about finding the calories first and reverse engineering those macros, whereas now we learn the macros first, and the calories wind up, adding themselves up together and hitting the calories that you need as long as the macros are hit. So I understood, like, diet-wise, that we're going to have to get enough protein, going to have to train hard enough, etc. But really thought that as long as, I don't take gear, then, I could still get there if I train hard. But gear really does all the work for you. That's what I thought. Excuse me. Excuse me. Allergies kicking my ass today. So literally, I thought...
I don't think the gear does all the work for you. It creates an environment where you're recovering faster and you can train harder and longer and more often. And that's what creates the result, as long as your calories support that. That's what I believe. So,
man, these guys that are taking steroids, they're not even working out hard. Like, do they even work out? And then you read things like the study, which 600 milligrams a week of testosterone or whatever it was, they showed the people that didn't work out increased their muscle mass, right? But they don't say that increased it by like an eighth of a tenth of a pound, like this little minute amount that doesn't really count. That literally could be taken into account that they weren't training with weights, but they're still moving around, being active, in which their body was adapting to those activities, getting better at those activities, and the muscle could be built like that small amount of muscle. So under the guise of steroids do all the work for you, didn't want to be a cheater. Now, get to the point where I can't make gains anymore. And then you start thinking...
Wait a minute, didn't want to be a cheater. Don't worry about the heart attack or the organ damage that could ensue, but just didn't want to be a cheater.
Thinking about it. And then a source comes up. Now we can source it. Now you need to make the decision, am I going to do this or am I not going to do this? Plain and simple. Am I going to shit or get off the pot? What am I going to do? In my head, I'm already like, well, I already made these plans to look like Dorian without it. Well, those plans went out the fucking window because it's not happening. So you're either going to spin your wheels and get there so slow that you never get there, or you're going to take that next step and see what happens, because I don't know. I think it does all the work for me, but I'll just keep training really hard with it. That way there, I'll get even better gains, right? Like, that's what I was thinking in my head. So, if it does all the work for me, and I train hard, and I eat a good diet, it's going to be even better. Hang on. Then you start taking your first cycle. And then you notice you go in the gym after. For me, it always works like this. It's like clockwork. I take the shot, and it doesn't matter whether it's long acting, short acting. Within the first week, I feel it. And I specifically feel it in the gym while I'm lifting weights. I notice that things start to get very light. Any kind of like aches and pains I have start to go away. And everything seems really efficient. Like my movement patterns get better. Everything feels easier. The weights feel lighter. I get less, I don't want to say exhausted, but...
He was saying that aches and pains seem to go away, but isn't it also that your muscle bellies get disproportionately stronger than your tendons? So then you end up having more tendon tears, because your force is greater than the capacity for your ligaments and your tendons to keep up. So it's kind of like an oxymoron in a sense.
But I get less fatigue from the sets, and it forces me to use heavier weights. So I use heavier weights, I increase the reps. I use heavier weights, I increase the reps. I had dieted down now to 173 to compete when I was 19. By the time I turned 20, I had dieted down to that same weight again. I didn't wind up competing because I was in another class. You go from teens to juniors, which those was 20 years old to 23. And those guys were a lot bigger, so I wasn't going to make that junior class. It was a natural league too. It was the ANBC. And then I finally said, you know what? Like, why don't I just try this? So I start taking gear at 173 pounds. Now I'm expecting about maybe 15 pounds to gain, right? So I'd be pushing, 190, somewhere around there. And what winds up happening is I keep training the same way as when I was natural. And I go from 173 to 230 pounds in 10 weeks. Now, is it all muscle? No. But the amount of strength that came with it and the amount of size that came with it, everybody around me couldn't believe what was going on. And I'm like, this...
Isn't there a lot of water retention? And it takes longer to create the muscle? Like a lot of people get bloated and the moon face and all that stuff.
It is unbelievable because I'm training harder. I was like, I didn't even think I could, because you don't know when you're young. You think you train, everybody thinks they train hard. I'm an animal, I'm this, I'm a fucking psycho, whatever. And then you train with somebody who trains harder than you, you're like, oh fuck, there's another level. There's always another level. Unless you've trained with Tom Platz or fucking Dorian or one of those guys, like, listen, you're training, but you're not training like them. Like, you're not to that level, even though you think you are. But then you start taking gear and you're training heavier, and the focus gets better because now, you go to pick up a bench press, it's not 225, it's 405. You pick up 4 wheels and it wants to push you through the bench. You feel that weight, and you bring it down, and you're like, what the fuck? You're like, I'm going to get crushed. And as you go to press it back up, you're like, I can't believe I just pressed this. You're training harder, right? You're taxing the body, you're stimulating the body with heavier weights, more sets.
It's not necessarily that heavier weights mean that you're training harder. You know what I mean? It's yeah, you're going to get stronger with training and obviously with training on gear, but I mean, you can increase the intensity many ways. So eventually you're going to have to raise the weights, but to a point where, like, people jump weights like 50 pounds at a time, and and I've heard this before. I know people who are on steroids, and that's what they say, that you can't train without like 4 or 5 plates on bench press or squats or whatever. And I can honestly say I don't know, because he's saying that people who are off it feel a certain way. I guess that's why I'm watching the video, to see his perspective on both ends. Or I might have to hop on gear.
So you'll wind up training harder. So I found personally, anytime I was on gear, I was training harder than when I was off gear. Matter of fact, most people, when they go off gear, actually lighten the load. They start to cut back in their training, they cut back in the volume because they can't recover and they can't train like they did on the gear. So what does that tell you? It's not the gear did the work for you. The gear allowed you to crank the intensity up a notch and the volume to get faster results because you can train heavier. You can train more often. It makes your body a more efficient machine. But it doesn't do the build muscle out of nowhere like I thought it did. Right? Now, some people that never tried gear think that. I did too. I was there. But I went through life and experienced.
I don't think that. I always thought it was the recoverability, the frequency, and if you eat enough, it just emphasizes, what's the word I wanted to say? Augments what you already have. So if you got all your training and recovery and eating on point, it allows you to get better results from that, and then you could even up it a notch.
And had all these people around me throughout the years experience it, so I know from personal experience what's going on. Now, when you look at it from the point of, you're taking gear, I think that once you take gear and you get gains, and especially if you do it for a long time. So for me, I was 20 years old to about 35 or something like that, 33, however long it was that I was doing this for. Your physique, because you go off here and there, but it's not long enough for your body to really go backwards that far. And a couple times I did go off for a really long period of time, like 6 months or more, my body went backwards a lot. And I chalked it up to like, maybe, my HPTA system is not right, so maybe I should have done a PCT. Maybe, my body composition was changing. I was getting fatter and weaker. So, of course, I'm trying to cut back on the calories a little bit. I'm trying to figure out how to not get fat. So your body starts changing when you stop taking the drugs. However, in your head, right, you're thinking...
Yeah, that's the thing, because once you add the gear in, you're not able to stay in tune with your body. It's like a shock to your body, and then you kind of ride with it, and it is easier to get the results, so you can probably slack on some of the things you're doing, and then once you get off, it's another shock, and then to adapt, it takes a while to adapt, to relearn how to train off gear, if that makes sense. That's the thing, I guess, especially if you're doing a lot of dosages. I know he did a lot of doses, and so it's like, how can you keep up with that, especially when you go off it?
That you're doing all the work because you're training harder. And you're not realizing how much those drugs really do. Because without...
Yeah, you're training hard. I mean, I train hard, but after a while I get tired and I can't do that for a certain time. So I have to kind of deload, or now I'm doing like lighter, more repetition days to kind of minimally stimulate my muscles, but not doing it to the point where I'm tired throughout the day, and to allow the fatigue to kind of dissipate. And speaking of that, if you go on to Mike Israetel, he talks about that, and he's on supplements, you know what I mean? But he applies the principle of deloading, and I don't know, I think like if you get the better you are at training, the better you are. I mean, you know, once you add the roids. Alright, the camera cut off. I think it has a cutoff of what, 20 minutes maybe? I don't know, 30 minutes? It cut off, so I missed the end. I kept talking. So I'm just gonna add this outro. If you like this video, share it, like, comment, dislike, follow the channel, subscribe to the channel. That's it. Have a good one.